Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another weather forecast by Adrian's Weather Forecast. And I do apologize for the lack of uploads throughout this week. I have been extremely busy between cross country practice, which ends pretty late, homework, unit. I've just been extremely busy and I have not found the time to actually record videos. I really, really do apologize. I have been very off my schedule lately, and I greatly apologize for that. But in this video, we're going to be talking about the severe weather potential for tomorrow, as well later into the early end of next week. Here, watching out, obviously for day 4, and as well watching out for day 5. But we're gonna be talking about that more in the next 2 days or so. But we're gonna be focusing specifically on tomorrow, as we do have a all risk driven enhanced risk here for hail, wind, and as well tornadoes. So definitely watch out for portions of the Ozarks and as well south central portions of the Midwest there for tomorrow. So, but without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and go over the actual timing, regions, and as well what can we expect, and just overall what the forecast is for tomorrow. But without further ado, let's get in the video. So here's a look now at the actual day 2 outlook. Again, this is for tomorrow. We do have a level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk all the way from portions of Arkansas and portions there of northeastern Oklahoma all the way up into portions there of much of Missouri is actually included in this, kind of stripping down through Jefferson City, St. Louis, and Joplin, and then as well going to portions of western Illinois, including areas basically within basically that general vicinity of near Springfield. So the enhancers include around 7 million people, including St. Louis, Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, Columbia, Missouri, Fort Smith, Arkansas, and Fayetteville, Arkansas. Again, it goes through a pretty large chunk of Missouri and as well a pretty decent chunk of northern Arkansas, as well as slight risk is pretty widespread all the way from basically areas of basically far southern Iowa and as well into areas near Paducah and Louisville, all the way down to areas near far northeastern Texas near Texarkana. It's a pretty large slight risk there. So you're going to watch out for some pretty widespread severe weather, basically in areas specifically kind of near the either just west of the Mississippi River or right on the Mississippi River. That slight risk includes around 8 million people, including Memphis, Kansas City, Missouri, Tulsa, Little Rock, and Overland Park, Kansas. And then, of course, the marginal is pretty widespread from areas basically close to DFW all the way up into areas near Cincinnati as well as Indianapolis, and it does include Louisville, Kentucky, Indianapolis, Plano, Topeka, and Peoria. So this is the overall look. Again, like I said, this is a all 3 driven factor for enhanced. So again, so we do actually have a 10% SIG for tornadoes, and again, this is for late October, this is actually not extremely. This is actually not too rare, but it's definitely still pretty impressive that we're managing to still get enhanced risk plus driven tornado risk here. And this is again a 10 sig for a very more smaller part and kind of more I guess you could say it's within a specific region, the enhanced risk. So here's the actual look at the 10 sig. Basically, that's a 10 sig, and look at the compared to the enhanced risk. So it is kind of centered across a specific area in the enhanced risk because we have an area obviously before upscale and an area after upscale. So kind of the area after upscale, which basically is portions of Illinois. That's where that tornado risk will obviously die off, as we'll be watching out for more those discrete supercells and surface-based supercells across the area in the 10 sig specifically. That 10 sig actually includes around 5 million people, including St. Louis, Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, Columbia, Missouri, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and St. Charles, Missouri. So it actually includes St. Louis there, as well includes, of course, Jefferson City, as well includes Joplin, as well includes that general vicinity. And then we have an area of a 10, we actually have a small area 10 non-sig that includes, I believe that includes, I actually don't know any really other cities except, actually I think Fayetteville, Arkansas is not in that 10 sig. And then we have a very, very widespread slight risk, obviously slight risk of 5% all the way from basically the portions of to the east of the Mississippi River, including Memphis, as well including areas near, I believe that's going to include areas near Paducah, and it's going to right the very, very western tip there of Indiana, and then of course including Kansas City, Little Rock, Overland, and Kansas City on both sides, and then a pretty widespread 2% all the way from basically central Indiana all the way down to Texas. Again, it's going to be pretty widespread linear mode in the overnight hours. So it's going to be pretty widespread, long, and obviously pretty expansive QLCS. So that's why the 2% is pretty widespread from Tulsa, Oklahoma, all the way up to areas near Champaign, Illinois, and Evansville, Indiana. As well, like I said, it's also again a 36. This is going to be the biggest, really. The wind and the wind and the tornadoes are going to be the by far the biggest threat, with the hail, of course, being another big threat. But the wind's going to be a pretty significant threat for specifically more towards I guess the east half of that enhanced risk, and that's why we do have an enhanced risk for Illinois. This is, you can tell by the enhanced risk, it's kind of specifically that SIG is more for the more eastern half of the enhanced risk, and the reason is because at that point it will most likely start to become upscale and be kind of just gust out into a strong linear mode, an overnight event. So that's why we have a 30 SIG. That's more likely what we see, where we will see a gust of over 65 knots. Again, the SIG actually includes around 5 million people, and St. Louis is basically right in the heart of this. So we're going to have to watch that first, and potential damaging winds across St. Louis and as well across much of northern Arkansas, as well into portions of western Illinois, with the other 30 non-SIG, which includes Columbia, Missouri, and Fort Smith, Arkansas. And then at 50%, obviously, will continue to expand its way eastward, as we're going to be seeing still a pretty significant still linear mode. And then we have a 30 non-SIG hail event that's going to be for specifically a little bit on the central half and kind of western half, and that's where we're going to be seeing those better lapse rates and more dry adiabatic lapse rates. Basically, that's going to be the best area to see some pretty good hail. Something I want to mention though is that in the very bottom of the discussion, the Storm Prediction Center says an upgrade to moderate might be warranted in later updates once mesoscale details become more apparent, and it will most likely go moderate. If anything, if it goes moderate for anything, it would most likely be for the wind. I do not see any 15 SIG worthy for tornadoes as of now. We're still kind of lacking some the lower end shear values. I mean, if we actually get some back southerlies, though, that would probably maybe allow for that small discussion of 15 SIG. But if anything, if it goes moderate, if it does go moderate, which is obviously isn't completely 100% likely, it would most likely be wind driven. So let's now look at the latest composite relativity here for the HRRR, obviously, which is extended towards tomorrow. It's obviously already in reach. So let's now get a look at what the HRRR wants to have kind of with the mode wise. So as we get towards tomorrow, obviously, we're going to be seeing some pretty strong storms overnight, which is why we have a slight risk for portions of northern Missouri right now, or for today obviously, in the overnight hours. But as we now get toward tomorrow, at 120 and 21Z, you're going to start seeing some semi-discrete cells starting to develop across western Oklahoma as well into portions of far eastern Kansas. And these are going to become more elevated base. Going to watch out for some significant hail as well as some pretty gusty winds. Not going to be seeing we're not going to be really seeing a apparent tornado threat really with those early on cells developing, obviously along that orientation front. Of course, but as we now get towards a little later on, 22Z and a little 23Z, you're going to start seeing some embedded supercells and some potential semi-discrete supercells developing, obviously, towards elevated base. Can watch out for some potential for some tornadoes across central Missouri into portions, like I did say, all the way down to portions of Oklahoma. But my area to watch out for tornadoes is going to definitely be portions of central Missouri. But look at these really good cells, obviously. As we get towards around 1Z, it's going to start to transition into an upscale event, become kind of basically all linear and kind of gust out. At that point, we're going to watch out for still potential for some embedded supercells within the linear mode, but obviously that will dramatically decrease in the overall confidence. The best area to watch out for tornadoes in my area would be basically, I'd say, kind of across this general vicinity is going to be the best area to watch. Or actually, let me redo that. I think this would be the best area based on the HRR to watch out for tornadoes across central Missouri, as well. Going to watch out for some damaging winds as well as some embedded tornadoes across the St. Louis metro as well into portions of western Illinois, and of course the slight risk goes pretty far north into Illinois because of that large, kind of big QLCS. So going to be watching out for some pretty large QLCS, and that's why we have such a large 30 SIG, and that's why the 30 SIG is actually specifically centered across the eastern half of that 30%. Let's now get a look now at the overall dew point temperatures for tomorrow based on the HRR. And actually, before we do that, I actually want to show you guys the NAM. I want to show you guys actually the NAM. I have not seen the NAM. Or actually, let me see the actual NAM 3 kilometer. I want to see what the NAM 3 kilometer wants to have for the latest composite relativity. I actually have not seen it. at all, actually, whatsoever. So this is gonna be very interesting. So this is the latest 18Z in the NAM 3 kilometer. So let's see what they have basically. And they, of course, have the obviously intense overall linear mode tonight to northern Missouri. And then as we get towards the round, let's see here, 22Z, there you see these first storms starting to develop across western Missouri. You can start to see these cells kind of develop towards Joplin and as well near Miami, Oklahoma. And as we get towards now 1Z, that's where we're going to definitely watch out for, like I said, areas of the kind of central Oklahoma or central Missouri going to be the area to watch out for some embedded supercells, the semi-discrete cells going all the way stretching down into Arkansas. So we can very well watch out for multiple areas to watch out for tornadoes. And then kind of the near 3 kilometers, a lot less kind of intense towards that wind threat and linear mode for portions of St. Louis. Kind of has a little bit more intense linear mode kind of for Arkansas and southern Missouri actually. So the NAM and ARRR differing just a tad bit, but kind of getting the point across that we're going to watch out for the main area to watch out for that tornado potential will most likely be towards central Missouri in that general vicinity. But let's not get to the actual kind of thermos here. So actually, once we get towards around 18Z, you're already seeing some pretty widespread dew points into the actual mid and high 60s here. So we're going to be seeing some really good dew point ejection as well from the 850 millibar jet. We're going to be seeing a lot of moisture kind of ejecting from the Gulf of Mexico. That's going to allow for a lot of moisture ejection and a lot of overall advection going on here. That's going to allow for some pretty favorable warm sector across much of Missouri, Oklahoma, and Arkansas early on by 18Z. Again, like I said, going to start seeing these wind bars start to kind of see these backed southerlies. Yeah, it's going to transition towards a pretty favorable environment by 22 to 23Z, and it's going to be some pretty favorable conditions for portions of central Missouri as well. Watching out for some decent conditions there across Oklahoma. But let's actually get a look at some soundings here within this warm sector. So let's not get a look here at some soundings. So let's actually look at early on sounding here at 22Z, kind of in the middle of that area of some pretty good advection, moisture advection. There's a little bit of slight contamination within this ARRR. It's not too. I mean, it's pretty. It's a decent sounding here. I mean, there's some pretty good thermos. I mean, thermos are not bad whatsoever, but there's a lot of contamination within these soundings here, as you can tell. A lot of contamination, but this one's actually not too shabby. We are seeing a slight cap there. You can see the very kind of lower at around 1,000 millibars. We're going to be seeing that really surface cap, but due to the overall decent forcing we're seeing, and as well some pretty good overall varying with height, we are going to be seeing some pretty overall great. I mean, not great conditions, but conditions that could very well overcome this slight cap. But this is actually not too shabby of a sounding. It could be a lot better, but we're seeing some pretty good overall kinematics within the sounding. But let's not go a little bit further in towards around 0Z. We're going to really watch out for that transition toward that tornado mode a little bit towards east central Missouri as well. We can't forget about, of course, Oklahoma. Going to watch out for some tornadoes down there as well. At around, that's kind of a little bit later on. That's a decent sounding there. It's an all right photograph. As we get towards 0Z, you're going to start seeing these dew points start to really skyrocket. They're going to start seeing a lot more kind of injection or ejection there of that moisture across Oklahoma. There's a lot of contamination though, and the wind bars are starting to kind of go all over the place. As we start to see that cold air start to make its way towards Oklahoma into the overnight hours, we're going to start seeing these dew points really dramatically decreasing. They get towards really around 1Z, going to start watching out now for this transition towards Missouri, kind of towards St. Louis, Missouri. And that's where we start seeing now these inverted V soundings and a lot more caps. At this point, it's going to start becoming basically upscale pretty quickly there. But it's not going to upscale kind of early on. It's actually going to take a while to upscale. I mean, we're going to be watching out for a pretty long, discrete time frame. But then it's going to upscale basically just at around the St. Louis time frame. So let's now look at theta E temperature here. So we're going to be seeing some overall decent overall instability here. I mean, we're going to be seeing around 343 Kelvin temperature, 338 towards 21Z. But as we now get towards 22Z, I mean, we're not going to be seeing a crazy amount of instability like we saw in October 10th or October 10th and October 13th. I mean, there's this instability is really not compared towards that instability. But 21Z looks actually decent towards west central Missouri here. I'm going to watch out for maybe some potential for tornadoes to potentially develop there, but you kind of towards the wind barbs. I mean, they're pretty close together, that 1 kilometer, 6 kilometer. So I mean, it's pretty close there. That's definitely not the best thing to see. So, like I said, it's gonna be some slight potential for some tornadoes in those first cells developing along that orientation. But 2700 Cape, they're not too shabby. I mean, there's really no capping here. This is kind of more of a really good wind sounding here, an elevated base sounding here. So we could very well see some decent hail actually within the sounding. It's all decent tornado sounding. I mean, it's not the best, but let's now look a little bit towards now the border of Missouri and Oklahoma. Now this is a little better, but still, it's not the best. I mean, it actually does lack some shade in those lower levels. But let's just now get towards around 22Z and around 23Z. These cells have to make their way towards Missouri, central Missouri, and like I mean, they're all right. I mean, this is definitely most likely not going to become moderate for tornadoes. I really doubt it. I mean, it just does not look like it's moderate worthy for tornado. But let's see what the NAM 3 kilometer is says. Obviously the NAM tends to become more aggressive, specifically when you get towards a closer run. But let's now look at what they have for the Theta E. And yeah, they have a lot more instability than the HRR. The HRR 18D tends to be really kind of just killing this event a lot. But look at the overall NAM. They have a lot of instability. It's actually taking this instability a little bit further towards central Missouri compared towards western Missouri. So 21Z and 22 and even 23Z are going to be very interesting for areas up kind of south central Missouri. I mean, this is actually a lot better. This is a lot better overall kinematics and thermos. I mean, these thermos are a lot better in the NAM than the HRR. I mean, look at now northern Arkansas, 344 Kelvin temperature. This is actually all right sounding. But let's now look specifically towards the southwestern portion, towards Springfield. I mean, this is actually not too shabby of a sounding either. I mean, a lot better kinematics, a lot better thermos. I mean, even a lot more stability in general along this orientation front as we get towards around 23Z. That's where it's kind of really peak there across central Missouri. At that point, it's going to start becoming more upscale as it gets closer towards St. Louis, and it's going to really just become a linear mode. I mean, all decent sounding. So obviously, there is still some contamination, but we can't rule out the possibility. I mean, this is still some all right. Still some really good kinematics as well. Those thermos will start to become a slight issue, but the kinematics are definitely there for tornado potential within that overall embedded squall or that embedded QLCS there. But let's now let me now minimize my screen a little bit since we're not going to be looking at any more soundings. This is now a look at the overall 500 millibar jet from the HRR, and the HRR is showing some pretty decent actual, a decent overall amped up little jet with some decent shear there. Going to be seeing values at around 60 knots, some spots of over 75 knots. And as we get towards 1Z and then 2Z, like I said, it's going to kind of be really amped up. That's going to really allow for some slight potential for some tornadoes across the embedded. So we could very well see some embedded supercells developing across that St. Louis area around 84 knots or so. So that's the kinematics will really be carrying that QLCS tornado potential there. But seeing some really good southwesterlies, obviously a pretty amped up little jet, basically starting to really develop. It's going to just allow for a really strong 30 sig worthy, potential moderate worthy if the SPC does pull it. But if anything, this will go moderate for the wind threat, and it most likely will be closer towards this general area, most likely. But yeah, definitely watching out for the chance for an upgrade on the wind threat. Definitely looks like it's still pretty good QLCS, and it looks like a pretty intense linear mode here, specifically now developing there to East Central Illinois. But that's a really amped up. And look how that little jet and the kind of that low pressure kind of steepens. So it's definitely going to actually really strain. But let's now compare this towards the NAM 3 kilometer here really quickly here. I'm always forgetting to compare it. Let's now compare this towards the NAM 3 kilometer. And let's see what this has to say. I've actually not checked the NAM 3 kilometer at all today, really. So I'm actually checking this for the first time. And the NAM 3 kilometer, again, it's pretty aggressive in the overall early run, getting 23Z here. As well, even 22Z already at around over 70 knots, and as well towards 1Z, really intense shear across central Missouri. So could very watch out for some pretty intense cells to develop along that little jet basically. And then of course really high amount of shear there across Missouri and Illinois. Gonna definitely watch out for some pretty intense mid-level shear as well. It seems pretty good lower shear as well. But let's look at the 850 millibar height, and as well this will be the main reason for this extreme ejection of that moisture in the south central portion of the United States by 18Z, and then 20Z seems to be pretty good. 50 plus not actually, and as we get towards 0Z, 2Z, and even 3Z, going to be getting over 60 knot 850 millibar. So definitely watching out for some potential for as this 850 millibar coming basically here, basically like that, and then you see kind of the basically 500 millibar coming in like that. Gonna definitely watch out for some potential for some embedded supercells as well as tornado potential across areas of Illinois and as well as Missouri.